I leaned back in my chair in my small apartment in Prescott, Arizona, as the shadows of the night filled the room with an unsettling silence. The dry desert air poured in through the half-open window, lifting the rusty curtain that swayed gently, as if whispering ancient secrets. It was a warm August night, and although the clock struck just over 9, darkness already dominated the quiet streets of the neighborhood where I lived. My name is Aiden. I'm 16, and that night I was home, alone. My parents had traveled to Phoenix to visit family for a week, trusting that I would take good care of the place while they were away. I wasn't used to spending so much time alone, but I didn't care much either. I enjoyed the freedom, the silence, and the possibility of exploring thoughts and places without the constant presence of adults. My apartment was on the second floor of an old wooden building surrounded by a small yard with a few gnarled trees and dry bushes. Outside, the garden seemed asleep, submerged in darkness, almost forgotten by time and life that used to fill that place. Sometimes, looking at the yard at night caused me discomfort. It wasn't for anything tangible. There were no signs of invaders or wildlife, but there was something about the darkness, a sensation that could only be described as an invisible gaze, something that seemed to upset the balance of that night-muffled scenery. I was sitting on the old, worn sofa in the living room when I decided to get a bottle of water from the kitchen. With slow, almost silent steps, I walked there, the muffled sound of my feet on the carpet echoing only inside my mind. I opened the refrigerator and picked up the bottle, and then turned to the large window that overlooked the garden. As I turned my gaze outward, I noticed a dark, motionless shadow leaning against the far side of the wooden fence that divided my yard from the neighboring vacant lot. For a moment my heart seems to have stopped. The figure seemed so static that for a moment I thought it was just a log or a forgotten object. But there was something wrong. The silhouette looked crooked, disproportionate, almost wrong. My breath was held for a moment. The feeling of being watched, which was once only a vague discomfort, has now gained shape and weight. Slowly I pulled the curtain to the right and tried a closer look. Nothing moved, only the solid darkness of the strange being that seemed to deny the light of the moon. I turned on the kitchen lamp, and the dim light cut out the shadows of the garden with a suffocating sharpness. The figure was still there, motionless, as if waiting for something. A shiver ran down my spine. I returned to the living room, trying to convince myself that it was all just imagination and the result of fatigue and loneliness. I picked up my phone to send a message to my best friend, Jade, but the screen was without signal, that half-forgotten place in the Arizona countryside rarely offered good connections at night. I turned it off and put it in my pocket. I would have to deal with it myself. I decided to prepare a coffee to calm my nerves. As the water boiled, I heard the creaking of the old eaves of the house outside, the dry sound cutting through the silence like an invisible blade. I placed a mug on the table and went to the window again. This time the figure had moved a few steps to the left, gliding silently between the dry bushes that surrounded the yard. I tried to focus. My vision was bad in the dim light, but it didn't feel human. The head seemed to tilt strangely, the shoulders too, wide and irregular. I grabbed a flashlight from the closet to search the area better, thinking about moving anything away. When I turned on the beam of light to the garden, the darkness responded like a curtain that seemed to absorb the light. The flashlight illuminated. Just a few feet away from the door, nothing but the dried plants and pieces of wood. The figure was gone, almost as if it had never been there. A quiet restlessness took over my mind. It seemed that something was watching me, even if it was no longer visible. At that moment, the phone rang. The shrill sound echoed through the house, making me jump with fright. I answered with a trembling hand. On the other side, a calm but firm voice said only, "Watch out for the night." Not everything that is in darkness wants to be seen. I hung up, perplexed. Who could be calling at this hour? The voice did not correspond to anyone I knew. I sat down, my mind racing in 1,000 directions. There in that old house, surrounded by black earth and the mysteries of the plains, I felt that something very old was about to emerge. With my heart racing, I decided that I would no longer be alone. I grabbed my coat and, in the backyard, watched the stars trying to ignore the shiver that never passed. Something or someone was there, on the border between the world I knew and an ancient secret that the night held with invisible claws. The darkness was not empty. She hid a presence and was just waiting for my next decision. After that enigmatic call, I couldn't get back to focusing on what was supposed to be a quiet night. The clock in the room was almost midnight, but the silence seemed even thicker, as if the air itself had gained weight and refused to move. My eyes did not turn away from the window that overlooked the backyard, where the shadow of the missing creature still seemed imprinted in the darkness, like an intangible stain that repressed the familiar scenery. I quickly put on my sweatshirt and went down the stairs leading to the backyard. The cool night air cut through the scorching heat of the day, bringing momentary relief, but also a growing sense of restlessness. The gnarled trees swayed gently in the wind, and a distant, almost imperceptible sound seemed to come from the neighboring vacant lot. I stood still, trying to identify that strange noise, a mixture of scratches and slight clicks, as if something was moving through the dry leaves. I grabbed the flashlight more firmly and illuminated the perimeter. Nothing visible but the swaying bushes. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the fear that was tightening in my chest. I decided I needed help, someone who could understand what I was feeling. The only friend I could trust in that small town was Lucas, a slightly older boy who worked at the municipal library and had always been interested in old stories and local legends. I took my cell phone, and to my surprise, the call went through. I called him, and after a few rings, Lucas answered in a low voice, asleep or scared. I quickly explained the situation, and he agreed to stop by that very evening, curious and worried at the same time. While I waited, I tried to mentally search everything I'd heard about apparitions and creatures in the area, nothing too concrete, just rumors and reports from ancient residents who mentioned dark shape-shifting figures, invisible predators that prowled when the moon disappeared from the sky. Lucas arrived shortly after, with a backpack full of extra flashlights, an old radio, and some scribbled notes. I felt more protected with him there, as if his study and knowledge of the unknown could shed some light on that situation. We sat on the porch, and I began to relate the events of that night, from the shadow in the backyard to the strange call. Lucas listened attentively, his serious expression indicating that he did not take it as a joke. He commented on an old Native American legend called skinwalker, a being capable of modifying its form and which, according to him, would have been the subject of many reports in the area. He explained that in the local culture these beings were feared for their ability to camouflage themselves and go unnoticed, acting stealthily to attack or manipulate. I felt a shiver when I heard that, but at the same time, a rational part was trying to rationalize the situation. But is this creature real? Or is it just an exaggerated story? I thought. Lucas, noticing my doubt, suggested that we go for a walk around the yard, armed with the flashlights, to try to find some concrete clue. Reluctantly, I accepted. We walked out the back door together, the night air colder than before. The silence was broken only by our steps and the crackling of the dry leaves under our feet. We roam every corner of the yard, lighting up the bushes and trees, looking for something abnormal. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, except for the freshly made marks on the ground on the opposite side of the fence, deep grooves, which looked like scratches made by claws. I looked at Lucas, my eyes wide. "This is recent," he said, as he surveyed Brands with the watchful focus of searching for answers in the midst of the unknown. The environment seemed to close around us, the shadows creating figures that the lantern beacon could not reach. Suddenly, a loud crack from the neighboring vacant lot caused us to frown and stop. Our bodies tensed, our muscles ready to react. "We are not alone," I murmured. Lucas agreed, and in silence we decided to approach the fence to try to see what caused that disturbance. We walked slowly until a brief silhouette passed quickly through the bushes caught our attention. The figure was not human. Its gait was gangly, its shoulders arched, and its head seemed to be tilted slightly to the side as if studying our movements. For an instant, the creature's eyes shone in the flashlight, displaying an amber glow that chilled my soul. Fear overwhelmed me, and I instinctively retreated. Lucas tried to remain calm, but his expression did not hide his nervousness. The creature disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, swallowed by the unrelenting darkness. We stood there, motionless, for long seconds that seemed like hours. "I don't know what that is, Aiden, but it's not normal. And it's coming closer," Lucas said, in a tense voice. I went back inside the house, locking the door behind us, my heart beating fast and my breathing irregular. The lights on seemed not to be enough to ward off the invisible presence that still surrounded us. As I tried to regain my composure, I thought about the anonymous call and the silent warning that was given to me. Whatever was that night had motives or intentions that I did not yet understand. The few hours of silence I had been granted before that moment now seemed only the prelude to something much greater and more terrifying. It wasn't just an unexpected visit in the darkness. It was the entrance into a world where legends came to life, and where I would have to face fears and monstrosities that were far beyond what I ever imagined. And in that sequence of thoughts, as the night progressed relentlessly, I understood that that creature, or what the night hid, was not only outside my home, but deeply rooted in something that crossed generations and echoed in the shadows of time. The night was still young, and the darkness had its own secret to reveal. In the nights that followed, something in the darkness seemed to change, as if the shadows took on a life of their own and molded themselves into an invisible force that grew beyond my understanding. What was once just a wandering figure in the backyard has become a constant foreboding, a presence struggling to adapt, learning from our movements, our fears, almost as if studying us to discover flaws. The first time I noticed this evolution was when, after carefully closing all the windows and doors, I heard a faint touch coming from the kitchen, something subtle, almost imperceptible, a knock that could not be attributed to the wind. I got up with a heavy heart, and when I turned on the light, I saw that a glass was overturned, spreading a few drops of water on the counter. No logical explanation came to mind. My feeling was that this had not been an accident, but a warning, a conscious gesture of those who lived there, but which did not show itself entirely. In the following days, the phenomena became more audacious. Shuffling footsteps echoed through empty corridors, fleeting shadows passed in the corner of his eyes, and the temperature plummeted for brief moments, as if the air was torn by something unknown. The creature, or whatever it was, seemed to unfold and multiply, while its physical form altered before my perception. At times, he could see a more humanoid body, but marked by inhuman contours, elongated fingers, a mottled skin, and eyes that did not blink, fixed like endless abysses. In others, it turned into a smoky shadow that crept through the cracks in the door, seeping into the smallest spaces, sending a chill down the spine. Lucas, who appeared frequently to try to help, also felt the changes. He spoke little, but began to carry old books on indigenous mythologies and forgotten accounts, as if looking for clues to decipher the mystery that surrounded us. "This is not just a visit," he confided one evening, as he put on a thick jacket in front of the door. "It's A hunt, and the creature learns quickly. He adapted to our defenses and our doubts. A growing sense of persecution became clear when, on a particularly quiet dawn, I sensed something near my bedroom window. There was no longer any need to glimpse their forms. The shadow pierced walls, flowing with a malice limited only by the imagination. When he turned on the light, nothing was there, and the darkness seemed to laugh inside, consuming the air with a suffocating weight. The presence began to manipulate the environment at will. Objects shifted, doors closed with sudden force, and the clock in the room accelerated and slowed down its ticking, leaving me bewildered. It was as if the creature was playing cat and mouse, marking territory, showing that the space I called home no longer belonged to me. On one of these nights, during a desperate attempt to understand, I saw the shadow at the end of the corridor unfurl and reconfigure itself into something that resembled a large but deformed man with excessively long limbs and an erected head that did not fit human proportions. His eyes shone deep red, like two carbuncles that burned in dim light. The pressure in the environment was so intense that I felt short of breath and sweat ran down my forehead. Motionless, my heavy breathing became the only proof that I still existed there. Without any warning, the creature disappeared, leaving only an even more terrifying silence in the air, the sound of my heart racing and the certainty that it would return, stronger and more cunning. As the nights progressed, the manifestations became more complex. One night I woke up to strange sounds coming from the backyard. It was no longer walking, but a whispered murmur, an incomprehensible voice that seemed to bend and distort like the wind between the dry branches. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers intensified until they seemed to form words in an ancient, almost lost language that made my skin crawl and thoughts wander between fear and fascination. On another occasion, as I looked out of the window with a flashlight, I saw multiple eyes shining in different places in the garden. There were not just two, but dozens, grouped in the shadows, following my movements intently. An urgent presentiment invaded me. The creature was not alone. Other beings, perhaps brothers of the same essence, began to manifest themselves in forms that elided from direct vision, stirred up vegetation, and uncomforted the senses. Despair began to grow inside me. I didn't know how far that horror could go, nor how far the darkness of the nights could surround me. Lucas suggested that we seek help from an elder from the nearby Indian reservation, a man known for his ancestral wisdom and knowledge of forest spirits and entities. Despite her fear, she knew she had to try. Before we left the house, I watched for one last moment the backyard taken by thick darkness where the bright eyes were still hiding. There was an intelligence behind that darkness, a presence as old as time, which adapted, grew and evolved in the face of our fears and attempts at resistance. I didn't know what awaited us in the coming nights, but what was certain was that these supernatural creatures, or forces, were not only lurking, but constantly changing, preparing something we might never be ready to face. At that moment, as I closed the door behind me, I felt the weight of darkness becoming thicker and the feeling that the boundary between the known and the hidden was disappearing, dissolving into thin air like a veil that could no longer protect anyone. The nights began to become vivid nightmares, where the line between what I saw and what my mind created became more and more tenuous, almost invisible. The house, which once seemed like a safe haven, turned into a changing maze, where the walls stretched and shrank without warning, the environment distorted, and every shadow seemed to want to swallow me. Looking into the dark corners of the room became an almost unbearable challenge. The space my brain recognized as familiar seemed to play with me, rippling as if it were alive, ready to reveal secrets it shouldn't know. It started with small details. The kitchen door I was sure I had locked was open. The smell of the air changed between warm, humid, and biting cold in a matter of seconds. The clock in the room just turned in erratic circles, sometimes accelerating, sometimes stopping abruptly. As these things happened, my mind faltered. I wondered if those changes were real or if I was losing control of everything around me. When the creature no longer needed to show itself, fear began to feed on doubt. A glance out of the window was no longer consoling, for the garden seemed to be transformed. The trees seemed more twisted, their shadows longer and more aggressive. The backyard floor seemed to pulse gently under the moonlight, as if it had a beat of its own. One night, as I walked down the hallway trying to stave off my fatigue, the floor seemed to step back. I felt the floor wobble beneath my feet, causing my balance to slip. For a moment, I thought I had fallen, but the pain I expected did not come. Instead, I stood erect, bewildered, staring at the ceiling that seemed to whisper indecipherable words, sounds that were exactly on the edge of comprehension. In the reflection of the window, I saw distorted shapes. There was no specific creature, but multiple figures flowing, as if darkness itself danced before my tired eyes. They writhed, changed shape and face in seconds, some women, some men, old. Souls who seemed to complain about the presence of the unknown. When I blinked, they disappeared, and everything seemed to return to normal, but a deep anguish remained, the feeling that something invisible was watching me, mocking me, and slowly approaching. The most frightening thing was my own fear, which seemed to feed those distortions, making them even closer and more real. One morning, the air in the house became so dense that I could barely breathe. It felt like the walls moved slowly around me. The ceiling fell in slow motion, and the lights flickered as if they were about to go out forever. I tried to turn on the flashlight, but the battery mysteriously failed, letting the darkness dominate everything. I mistook the sound of footsteps for the crackling of the house and the noise of my own heart. My body began to react on its own, with tremors that I could not control. I sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, lost between the feeling of collapsing in physical space and the madness that threatened my mental balance. It was the corruption of reality, established in a silent and implacable way. In the quieter moments, I tried to cling to reason, to remember the concrete things. Lucas's face, the words exchanged, the marks in the yard, but these memories also began to tremble, as if they were made of smoke, slipping through my hands, and turning the truth into uncertainty. When Lucas was here, I noticed that he also took longer to interpret things, as if the environment affected all those who ventured near this darkness. In a quick discussion, he admitted that he felt that something beyond flesh and spirit was moving between us, a place where time and space no longer obeyed natural rules. My nights began to be governed by strange sensations. When I closed my eyes, I found no rest. Vivid dreams showed me twisted faces, muted screams, and bright eyes watching me from behind the trees. I woke up sweating, with the certainty that something from the shadows had touched my soul, changing my interior. One night, while trying to sleep by the window, I saw a terrifying spectacle. The whole garden seemed to dissolve, the trees slowly flowing into themselves, as if the yard had turned into a thick black liquid. The sky darkened so much that not even the moon could shine. It was as if darkness took full control, eroding the lines between the real and the unreal, confusing me, making the whole house look like a place where logic simply didn't exist anymore. The streetlights, star cloaks, and the normalcy of life outside in Prescott came to exist at an unattainable distance, a world I no longer felt a part of. At the height of this despair, I realized that the creature did not need to be always visible to dominate that space. It had become a force, a chaos in motion, which diluted the stability of what I called reality. It was as if the whole place was a living, mutant, merciless organism, fueled by my own weakness and fear that I didn't know how to control. In a moment of absolute silence, as I stared at a wall that seemed to slowly undulate in front of me, I felt a presence approaching so close that the air around me became so heavy that I lacked real air. He knew, without having to look, that something or someone was there, beyond human comprehension, on the threshold between the world of the living and that of something that should never exist. It was not just a corrupted place, but a distorted reflection of my own mind, an abyss that threatened to swallow me whole. And in that instant, where reality and nightmare were so deeply mixed, I realized that the only thing certain was the doubt and fear that consumed me. The creature no longer needed form or body. She was everywhere and nowhere, an invisible whisper that corroded my sanity and robbed me of the certainty that I was still sane. The real darkness was not in the backyard, but within me, and the mystery grew deeper and deeper, more dangerous, where the corruption of reality left no room for escape, only the dark invitation to lose oneself. The days and nights had become the same endless stream of restlessness and doubt, a continuous struggle waged within me, where fear and the will to move forward were intertwined in a silent combat. Each breath seemed to carry the weight of an impossible decision: face that darkness that took over my world, or simply run away, abandon everything and disappear somewhere where the unknown could not reach me. Doubt corroded my mind, fragmented my thoughts, and now stared at me as an enemy as cruel as the creature I feared outside. Fear, this primitive and absolute feeling, pressured me to give in. Everything in me screamed to hide, to flee, and never to return to that house, to that garden that seemed to be the scene of horrors that surpassed human comprehension. Each time I tried to get up to look out the window, to peer through the cracks at the shadows that danced outside, my heart tightened as if crushed and my legs trembled, unable to bear the weight of doubt. Insecurity seemed like an invisible minefield, where any misstep could sink me into an abyss of no return. At the same time, there was something inside me that refused submission, a tenuous force, perhaps hope, or the need to protect the little that was left of my life, which pushed me to resist. It wasn't courage in the classic sense, but a stubborn desire to understand what was tormenting me and maybe, just maybe, find a way to control or end it. Frustrated with my own indecisions, I often sat in the living room, staring at the shadows that were cast on the walls, wishing that Lucas was there to help me order that chaos within. I knew he was looking for answers, in old texts and telling stories, but my battles were internal, a storm that not even my friends' words could calm down. In the midst of this war, the sounds of the house continued to grow in intensity, inaudible whispers that made my ears throb, and silences so dense that fear condensed as a palpable presence. And this atmosphere only made the weight of my decision even more overwhelming. One night, after yet another silent confrontation with myself, I realized that darkness was not just an external enemy, but a reflection of what I carried inside. A growing emptiness, fueled by loneliness and despair, which the creature seemed to recognize and explore. The thought that the darkness did not come in one piece from that backyard, but was born from those dark corners of my own being, terrified and challenged me at the same time. Between suppressed tears and heavy breathing, I tried to remember the moments before it all began. Normal days, with no dancing shadows or eyes that sparkled in the night. I wondered if there was a real choice, or if I had ever been consumed by it without realizing it. Escape, though it seemed tempting, became less possible with each new phenomenon that challenged my sanity. How many times have I risked calling my parents or someone who could help me? The mysterious voice I had heard that night now seemed to echo in my mind, an ominous reminder that darkness was not just in the garden, but wherever I went. On the other hand, facing that unknown evil meant accepting an immense weight, carrying a burden that could destroy me completely. The fear of defeat, of failure, of the total loss of my identity imposed itself like a wall that seemed insurmountable. At the same time, within this conflict, a kind of determination began to form, as if despair pushed me to a limit where human survival was confused with the need to face what terrified me. In the darkness of the room, surrounded by shadows that rippled and seemed to whisper my name, I stood up heavy and tired, but decided. I didn't know what I would face or what would be left of me after the clash, but I realized that to remain paralyzed was to become part of that terror, to let it grow and consume me. At the same time, a deep fear remained, that by entering that fight I might lose something essential, perhaps my sanity, my humanity, or even the little light that still burned inside my chest. The internal tension was a crossfire, where each step forward seemed to risk everything, and to retreat meant to surrender once and for all to the darkness. I felt a chill go through my body, and I realized that the moment had come. The choice was not to face myself or to flee, but how to survive the conflict that was taking shape between what I was and what that creature and that place threatened to transform me. The moment my breathing became heavier and my eyes fixed on that dark spot in the hallway where I knew a presence was hiding, a certainty throbbed inside me. I was not alone in this struggle. Perhaps the darkness was greater than my mind could comprehend, but it would also be no greater than the desperate will of a boy who refuses to disappear without trying to win. The house creaked again. The shadows approached without a definite form, and my body prepared for whatever came next. A battle that would be fought in silence between light and shadow, inside and outside of me. It was the final confrontation, to face the fear that terrified me, and maybe, this time, to be able to tame the darkness that ran rampant in the garden and in my own soul. The house was beginning to look like an enemy that surrounded me on all sides. Every object around me, no matter how small, took on a sinister aura, charged with an invisible weight that sucked my strength and my will. Things that were once ordinary, banal, and harmless now seemed silent marks of that presence that slowly consumed me, as if every bit of my routine was poisoned by the touch of darkness. There was an old clock in the room, one of those with hands that moved with a constant tick. The sound that had once soaked the house in serene rhythm now sounded like a trial drum. I felt my nerves tighten every time I heard him. Each beat seemed to synchronize with the accelerated beat of my heart, amplifying the panic that pulsed inside me. My eyes often fixed on him, as if he kept some secret, some warning of an inevitable fate. Then I began to realize that lifeless objects took on a life of their own in my presence. The handle of the toothbrush fell out of the bathroom for no reason. The lights flickered. The objects on the floor seemed to move light and agile, dragging from one corner to another with an invisible will that I did not understand, but felt deeply. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, a victim of the loneliness and anxiety that each night made stronger. But the feeling that something very real was happening made me slowly retreat. Vulnerability grew inside me, overwhelming and accurate. As the days passed, even clothes and books began to carry a strange presence. A worn-out book that Lucas had left behind appeared, mysteriously opened on pages I swore I hadn't read before. Those words seemed written, not for me, but to invoke a specific fear, a discomfort that took root in the depths of my chest. My mind swirled inside his own cell, trying to escape the labyrinth that this place had become. I wanted to run, to leave, to disappear, but it was as if the shadows had extended claws everywhere, making it impossible to even move a foot. Every step I took, every attempt to act, seemed to feed the invisible presence, making my heart more and more fragile. An old lamp in the bedroom began flashing with an irregular frequency, at a pace that didn't match any electrical fault I knew of. There was something almost mocking about that effect, as if the darkness played with me, pushed the right buttons to increase my terror, to erode my courage, and throw me into a hole of deep despair. At night, the weight of loneliness was overwhelming. Sitting on the floor, hugging myself, I contemplated every corner of the house that already seemed to betray me. The windows looked like prisons outside, invisible walls that isolated me from any salvation. Fear made me small, weak, dependent on impulses that I barely recognized myself. The whispers multiplied, trickling through the cracks in the house, hinting at secrets that my brain refused to understand, as if that darkness was an entity that fed on my darkest thoughts to grow. I knew that the moments of clarity were brief, and that soon I would sink back into the pit of silent terror that formed each night. An old mirror at the entrance seemed to be a special focus of this nameless curse. When he looked at me there, my reflection seemed to hesitate, as if for a moment something else, something slippery and dark, was trying to show itself. My image trembled, distorted, as if the truth hidden within me and that house wanted to reveal itself. Each glance at that reflection further eroded my trust in reality, throwing me deeper into a spiral in which I was both a prisoner and an executioner. The vulnerability showed itself in how my thoughts got lost along the way. Doubts, fears, even memories that were once neutral now took on frightening contours, shadows of the past that I didn't know I carried, and that the creature outside understood so well. I tried to seek refuge in the little rituals we had with Luke, lighting a candle, repeating words that were supposed to ward off evil, but even these frightening objects began to fail in their purpose. The flame trembled and went out on its own, and the silence of the words could not tame the storm that was gaining strength within me. At these times, I seemed to be left with nothing more than an empty shell, a body that moved automatically through a house that had become accustomed to being the territory of nightmares and invisible threats. Fear corroded my courage like invisible acid, destroying the walls of what I believed to be my strength. The darkness was gaining ground, sensing my impending collapse. The air seemed to get colder, and time seemed to drag on as I waited for something else to happen, to be hooked at any moment by a touch that took away any hope I was still able to muster. Everything seemed to conspire against me, the objects, the shadows, the ominous silence, and I was increasingly frail, unable even to cling to the illusion of control. The ultimate battle seemed not to be outside, but inside, where fear settled in and left me trapped in a vicious cycle. The night advanced like a silent monster, and I felt that at every moment I was closer to succumbing, to becoming just part of that cursed scenario, a ghost caught between fear and despair, between the light that was going out and the darkness that did not cease to grow around me. The silence of the night seemed overwhelming, as if the whole world had stopped to wait for the moment when I would finally face what had been consuming me for days. The air was heavy, humid, loaded with a strange smell that I couldn't identify, a mixture of wet earth, rot, and something indefinable that told me that the presence was close, very close. Every muscle in my body trembled, but the determination that had formed in the last few hours burned hard inside me, pushing me to the backyard door, to that dark ground where the creature that haunted me had been born from the shadows. With a trembling hand, I turned the doorknob and struggled to ignore the knot in my stomach that seemed to close my throat. The cold air hit me hard, an icy embrace that chilled my skin and accelerated my heart. There was no turning back. The steps were slow, conscious. Each step of mine sank slightly into the soft earth, marked by recent scratches that reminded me that danger was not just a possibility, but a present certainty. An oppressive feeling invaded me, as if all the shadows around me had taken on a life of their own, watching, waiting for my decision. The sky was overcast, dark clouds blocking any glimpse of stars or moon, leaving the world plunged into absolute darkness, as if the universe itself conspired to hide what would happen in a few moments. Then I felt a movement to my left, quick, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. My body froze, my breath caught in my chest, and I stared blankly at where the darkness had parted for a moment, revealing a pair of red eyes that shone with an almost cruel light. The creature was there, motionless and powerful, a presence that seemed to blend with the darkness itself, with limbs that writhed into shapes that defied all logic, as if that entity were an ancestral secret lurking between forms and nightmares. Fear tried to overwhelm me again, but the internal struggle I had waged in the last few days gave me the strength to stand firm. I held onto the piece of wood I had found in the garage, my only weapon against the unknown, and believed that it was more than just a piece of wood. It was a symbol of my endurance, a bastion against defeat. The creature advanced with a speed that made my heart leap. Instinctive impulses took over my body, the fight for survival pulsating in every fiber. His every move was strange, inhuman, the way he disappeared and reappeared in the shadows, defying perception, making the confrontation all the more frightening. The sound of wood cutting through the air, the low grunt that came out of the depths of that creature, and the feeling that time had compressed into eternal seconds, where life and death swung at the point of an invisible knife. The battle was intense and confusing, a tangle of shadows and rapidly alternating lights, where my hands trembled and my mind struggled to keep up with that cruel dance. I felt the heat of adrenaline, the pure, convinced fear mixed with a sweet and bitter anger, as if this confrontation was more than physical. It was the last barrier between my sanity and the abyss that threatened to engulf me. At one point, the creature of mine touched for an instant, a touch as cold as winter, which pierced my skin and made me see stars in the darkness. Despair threatened to consume me, but that moment was also the point where I found the strength to scream, hit, fight like I never imagined I could. The wood slammed into the deformed skin, producing a dry, shrill sound, each blow a visceral reaction that translated the urgency of not succumbing. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity among chaos, the creature retreated, leaving a trail of shadows that faded into the night like smoke in the wind. I fell to my knees, panting, body scarred, trembling with exhaustion and relief. She knew that this victory was only an instant, temporary, but she had done something essential. She had made it clear that she would not be an easy prey, that she would fight to the end, even when all seemed lost. In that moment when silence came back to dominate, the darkness also changed. It didn't disappear, but it seemed to respect something inside me, as if recognizing the courage that, despite the fear, I had managed to muster. I waited for dawn, feeling every sound take the house back, realizing that I still escaped, I still had a thread of hope to hold. The battle was not over, I knew that, but I also understood that the strength to face whatever was to come was born within me. Growing even more at every moment, I decided not to give in to the darkness. The silence that followed the battle was heavy, almost palpable, charged with a tension that did not disappear with the creature's retreat, but that became ingrained in every corner of the house, in the air I breathed, and in the rapid beating of my heart. I was still trembling, not just from the physical exertion, but from the whirlwind of emotions that overwhelmed me, the relief that I had endured, the lingering fear that it wasn't over, and the doubt that kept eating away at my mind. What if the monster returned? Walking through the house looked different now. Each shadow seemed like a silent challenge, a constant reminder that danger lurked, unseen, waiting for my weakness. The piece of wood still weighed heavily on my hand, a symbol of victory and vulnerability at the same time. I knew that I couldn't depend on him alone, that my struggle was bigger, deeper, and more frightening than simple physical thrusts. Sitting on the living room floor, my head leaning against the cold wall, I felt the weight of fatigue reaching not only my body, but my soul. For a moment, I let myself be carried away by a darkness of my own, an anguish that squeezed my chest tightly. Every decision I had made in the last few hours seemed fraught with unseen consequences. Could I have done more? Or maybe less? Was my courage enough? Or just a desperate act not to succumb to fear? The courage that had propelled me in that confrontation now seemed like a flickering flame, about to go out in the face of the immensity of the unknown that lurked in the shadows. My mind was looking for a logic, an explanation, a meaning that the terror of that creature had never offered me. I looked around and saw the signs of the fighting, marks on the floor, scratches on the walls, traces of the battle that had pierced the fine line between reality and nightmare. Every detail brought sharp memories, as if the house was telling its own story, a narrative of fear and resistance that I couldn't ignore. I felt loneliness as a cruel weight at that moment, even though Lucas was far away, perhaps seeking help or information that none of us had yet. His absence exacerbated fear, making the environment even more oppressive. Lying on the couch, my eyes stared at the dark ceiling, my mind spinning in circles. Clear paths to the future seemed to be non-existent, and uncertainty gradually knocked me down. The feeling of vulnerability crept back, reminding me that I wasn't in control of the situation, that the darkness held forces I hadn't even touched yet. Despite this, I felt a faint resistance growing inside me, a thread of hope that wouldn't let me sink completely into despair. I knew that I could not falter, that I needed to remain attentive, because this creature, or whatever it was, had not given up. The tension, although diminished, still pulsated in the house like an open wound. Sleep was elusive, broken by confused dreams and indistinct noises that my brain insisted on turning into imminent threats. With each distant noise, my body cringed, ready to flee or fight, almost unable to distinguish reality from paranoia. The constant feeling of being watched did not give me a moment of peace. I noticed small changes in the air, dancing shadows on the periphery of the vision, fleeting flashes that fed fear and took away my security. The next morning, the daylight brought temporary comfort, as if the sun were a shield against that terrifying darkness. But there was a thread of uneasiness that wouldn't dissipate. I knew it wasn't just a play of light and shadow, that danger lurked behind every corner, waiting for the night to return in full force. Reflecting on my choices, I felt a weight that surpassed the physical. The responsibility for having faced that carried a silent demand, a question that hammered. What if I had failed? What if my fight was just the beginning of something bigger? It was hard to hold on to some kind of normality when the reality I knew was fragmented at every moment. The nights went on long and restless. The objects inside the house continued to emit small vibrations of unease. A glass that fell on its own, an inaudible whisper, the sensation of something passing quickly through the corners of my field of vision. Every detail made my body stiffen, my heart race, and my mind fluctuate between fear and the need to control a situation that always seemed out of my reach. I was exhausted, body and mind, but sinking into resignation had never been a true option. That confrontation, while painful and terrifying, had shown me my own strength, even if fragile and on the verge of collapse. I knew that I would have to learn to live with fear, to pay attention to every sign, not to allow the darkness to completely dominate me. The presence that inhabited that house continued, invisible and threatening, and I prepared myself for the difficult days that were sure to come. Because deep down, I knew that the fight wasn't over there. It had just shape-shifted, preparing to try again, while I did my best not to be the next to succumb. As the first faint light of dawn broke through the shadows of the night, I felt an invisible weight descending on my shoulders. The house seemed to breathe slowly, exhaling a sigh that mixed relief and alertness. I had won that terrifying confrontation, not with guns or force, but with an unbreakable will to survive and face the unknown. However, as I looked out the window, at the silent backyard, an uncomfortable feeling grew inside me, as if the danger had never really disappeared, just hid to prepare the next attack. The once menacing garden now looked like an empty backdrop, but I knew that appearances can be deceiving. That creature, that shadow that so often turned into my worst nightmare, was not just an ordinary monster. It was the dark reinforcement of a world that few dared to remember. Something ancestral remained there, lurking, always beyond the reach of vision, always ready to return when least expected. I tried to calm my mind, to convince myself that the bright hours brought security, that the light of day dispelled the evil that the night brought. But deep down, I knew that belief was fragile as glass, about to shatter. The creature came from the depths of an ancient mystery, guarded by the shadows of the trees and the heavy silence of the nearby forest. And as long as the house was standing, as long as its walls kept the memory of that night, the danger would never really be defeated. I sat on the edge of the bed, my eyes fixed on some point, trying to find some meaning in it all. The questions piled up, with no clear answers. I wondered if anyone would believe that story, if there was any way to explain the inexplicable without being called crazy. But more importantly, would I ever be able to put my fear aside and sleep peacefully? As the sun rose in the sky, the sounds of morning filled the air, birds chirping, the gentle wind swaying the leaves, the distant rumors of the city awakening. Everything seemed normal, but inside me, a persistent alert flickered like a weakened flame. I felt like I'd crossed an invisible line, opened a door to a world where monsters and shadows danced silently, waiting to reveal themselves. At that moment, I understood that it was not just a creature, or even a single threat. It was the encounter with something that lives beyond what our eyes can reach, something that tests the limits of human courage and challenges the sanity of reality. I had survived, yes, but the word security seemed like a distant concept, a brittle desire that could unravel at the slightest sign. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling my pulse quicken for no reason, and I heard, or imagined I heard, a distant whisper coming from the backyard, something that belonged neither to the wind nor to the silence of the morning. A silent and direct reminder: darkness is never truly empty. She just waits for the right moment to rise again and swallow the light. I stood up, aware that life would go on, but that nothing would be the same as before. The experience had changed me, transformed me in a way that I was still trying to understand. I knew that even if the house remained quiet for days, weeks, months, the memory of that encounter would remain with me, a ghost that refuses to be forgotten. And so, among the shadows of what I lived and what could still come, I realized the truth that was hidden in the creature's red gaze. Some forces are not completely overcome. They sit at the edges of our world, waiting for the right opportunity to return. And when that happens, I'll need to be ready, not only to face the darkness, but to face the fears I hold inside. The darkness of the backyard remains, motionless and silent, a challenge that will not leave me alone, and neither did I, because at the end of the day, it's in the shadows that we discover who we really are and what we're willing to endure in order to survive. The night taught me that not every story has an endpoint. Some only leave us at the mercy of the unknown. And as long as I breathe, as long as there is light and shadow in this world, the creature in the garden will continue to exist. There, on the threshold between what is real and what is fear, ready to emerge when we least expect it. And I'll be here, waiting with her. If you enjoyed this chilling story and want to stay on top of more mysteries, terrors, and adventures that will mess with your head, click below to subscribe to the channel. don't forget to activate the notification bell so you don't miss any news, and always stay one step ahead of the darkness. Come be part of this incredible community of explorers of the unknown, where we exchange ideas, share fears, and have fun together. So let's sign up now and get ready for the next challenge, because here the suspense never ends.